On May 5th, 1945, the Dutch were liberated. World War II was over in the Netherlands. However, across the ocean, in the Far East, more than 100,000 Dutch people were still stuck in Japanese internment camps in the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia. They would be liberated in August 1945. But was this a true liberation? Find out more, because in this video I'm going to talk about the end of World War II in the Dutch East Indies. The Dutch East Indies was established in 1816, and over the course of the 19th century the Dutch expanded their colonial rule. From 1900, Indonesian nationalist movements started to emerge. The Dutch colonial government saw these political parties as a threat and carried out repressions. When the Japanese invaded the Dutch East Indies early 1942, the Dutch colonial establishment was taken down. The Japanese, they wanted to seize full control over the Indonesian archipelago, and therefore a Japanization of society took place. The Japanese saw the Europeans as a threat to their rule, and therefore these people had to be interned. Around 100,000 European and 30,000 Indo-Europeans were interned. Furthermore, 220,000 people, mostly Indo-Europeans, they were also interned, but not in camps. They were allowed to live outside the camps, and they were known as buitenkampers, outside campers, so to say. And this was all based on skin color. The darker your skin was, the more privileges you could obtain. Now, much has been written about life in these Japanese internment camps, or Jappenkampen, as Dutch people refer to it. I had the privilege to speak to several elderly people who, when they were young, were interned in these Japanese camps. And they all spoke about the life of hunger, boredom, and fear of the unpredictable behavior of the Japanese guards. Now, these camps were located where most Dutch people were located, and that was on Java and Sumatra. Most of these camps were in existing buildings. Think of schools, hospitals, and military barracks. There were camps for men and camps for women and children. I spoke to a man who was interned in the infamous camp of Chideng, which was located in a residential area in Batavia, now Jakarta. Chideng was a camp for women and children. Now, at first there was a civilian authority, but this was later replaced by a military authority, and the rules became more strict. Private cooking was outlawed and food rations were scarce. And as the war progressed, these food rations became scarcer. And furthermore, more people came into the camps. So at first there were 2,000 people interned in Chideng. At the end of the war, there were 10,000. The food rations shrank. The camps became fuller and the sentences became stricter. The lack of food, medical care, exercise, and a clean living environment resulted in high mortality rates. The people that I spoke about their experiences in the Japanese internment camps, they also spoke about the roll calls each morning, where all prisoners had to line up and had to be counted. Now, often Japanese messed up these countings, sometimes they did this on purpose, and the whole process had to start over again. And this all happened in the hot, burning tropical sun. From 1944, the camp of Chideng was under authority of a sadistic Japanese captain. His name was Sonai. He systematically terrorized the inmates by letting them stand for hours in the sun and fed his dogs in front of them in order to torment them. Sonai was eventually executed after the war was over, because on August 15th, the Japanese Empire surrendered. World War II in Asia was over. From that moment, the rules of the camp became more relaxed, although not everybody yet knew that the war was over. 16,800 people would not survive their time in the Japanese camps, which is roughly 1 out of 8 who perished. But more people would perish after the war was over. The eyewitness that I spoke, they said that from one day to the other, the camp rules became less strict. Later also help from the Red Cross was allowed to get in. Because families were separated during the war, people wanted to get to the other camps to see if their relatives and loved ones were still alive. Little did they know that the world outside had changed dramatically. After the Japanese occupation came to an end, the Indonesian nationalists led by Sukarno and Muhammad Hatta declared the Indonesian Republic on August 17, 1945. Sukarno wanted to wait, but was pressured by the Pemudas. Who were these? The Pemudas were radicalized youngsters. Some of them were trained by the Japanese as home guards, such as Pita, defenders of the homeland, and High Hosts, which were assistant soldiers of the Japanese. 6 weeks after this, the British landed on the Japanese city of Surabaya to disarm the Japanese. Now, although the British had no intention to battle these Pemudas, they were kind of forced to because they came under heavy attack by these extremists. In some cases, British and Japanese soldiers fought alongside against the Pemudas. Also, these Pemudas violently reacted against the Europeans that spent the wartime in the Japanese internment camps and were now able to go free. These Europeans found themselves at the hands of these very violent Indonesian youngsters, and thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, were slaughtered by the youngsters on the most horrifying ways imaginable. I spoke to a woman who as a child, after her time in the internment camp, saw how Europeans were hanged while still being alive and stabbed to death by Japanese bayonets. In some cases, Europeans ran back to the camps and found themselves under the protection by their Japanese guards, who, during the war, tormented them. Now, this period is known as the Bersiap period, and Bersiap is a battle cry that means be ready. Later, the Pemudas shifted their attacks towards the camps. An eyewitness that I spoke, she said that the camps became later guarded by British Indian troops who only fired when they were being fired upon. Later, these were replaced by elite Nepalese troops known as the Gurkhas, who, when they were being fired upon, went into the forest to drive out the enemy. The Second World War might have been over, but the Indonesian War of Independence was now unfolding, a war in which many Indonesians would perish, both armed and unarmed. The Dutch civilians, they soon left for the Netherlands. They were repatriated, but some were born in the Indies and had never been to the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, not much attention was given to the colonialists who had at least sunny weather over there, and contrary to the severe cold during the Dutch famine at the end of 1944, early 45. Many were plagued by PTSS, and their children suffered also. Only recently, more attention is given to the Dutch in the East Indies during World War II.